And now we will try to solve problem 7-3b. Now, compared to problem 7-1b, current problem introduces a new component of standard costing variance analysis. It is the factory overhead cost variance. So we will tackle it on this problem. So let's start. Okay, so let's see what this problem has to offer. Let's go over the details. Road Reaper Tire Company manufactures automobile tires. Standard costs and actual costs for direct materials, direct labor, and factory overhead incurred for the manufacture of 4,160 tires are as follows. We are given the standard cost and the actual cost. Under direct materials, standard is at 100,000 pounds at $6.40, while actual is 101,000 pounds at $6.50. Direct labor is at 2,080 hours under standard at $15.75, while actual is 2,000 hours at $15.40. Factory overhead, it says here that under standard is based on 2,000 direct labor hours on 100% of normal capacity. So we have here the values relating to the overhead per direct labor hour, variable cost at $4 per direct labor hour, and fixed cost at $6 per direct labor hour. Meanwhile, in actual, we have the total overhead cost for the company. So at variable cost, it is $8,200, and fixed cost is $12,000. So that's the details. Each tire requires 0.5 hour of direct labor. Okay, we have here the instruction. We have to determine the variances relating to direct materials, and the variance at letter B, the variances relating to direct labor, and the new component, letter C, the variances relating to factory overhead costs. So let's do this thing. Before we start solving the requirements given, we must first identify the important factors when computing the standard costing variances. So under direct materials, we need to know the standard quantity, the standard price, the actual quantity, and the actual price. Let us fill in the information of what the problem has given. Now for standard quantity, it has given us 100,000 pounds. The standard price of such pounds is $6.40. The actual quantity is 101,000 pounds, and the actual price is $6.50. That's for direct materials. Let's go to direct labor. Direct labor, we need to find the standard labor and the standard labor rate, and the actual labor and the actual labor rate. Let us fill in again the information given by the problem. Standard labor is at 2,080 hours at $15.75 per hour, and the actual labor is 2,000 hours at $15.40 per hour. And now we have here the actual output at 4,160 tires. Now that we have identified the important values relating to standard costing variance analysis, let us do the first requirement. Okay, the first requirement entails us to solve for the price variance, the quantity variance, and the total direct materials cost variance. So these are all variances relating to direct material cost. So we will focus more on direct materials with regard to the details. Okay, now remember the formula for price variance. It is actual price minus standard price times actual quantity. Since the values have already been given, we just need to input it, and the result will be $10,100. Unfavorable. Take note that it is unfavorable because the actual price is actually greater than the standard price. Now for quantity variance. Since this variance is relating to quantity, so based on the formula, it is more focused on the quantity aspect. Actual quantity minus standard quantity times standard price. Let's fill in the amounts. And now we have a result of $6,400 unfavorable because the actual quantity is greater than the standard quantity. So, from our previous computation, we have solved the price and the quantity variance. It will help us solve the next variance, the total direct materials cost variance. So, based on the name itself, it's just the total between the two variants we previously computed. So, carry over the amounts. Both are unfavorable. It is just a matter of simple addition. So now we have here the total direct materials cost variance of $16,500, still unfavorable. Now, one such reason why sometimes when solving direct materials cost variance, it results to unfavorable variances is because maybe due to market factors. The direct materials involving our production of tires suddenly have their price increase. So we spent more than what we usually pay. So that's one such reason. Okay, we'll proceed with the second requirement. Now we are asked to compute for the variances relating to direct labor, the rate variance, time variance, and the total direct labor cost variance. Since this is all about direct labor, so we will focus our attention on direct labor. So here are the details that we have identified before with regard to the important factors and the variances relating to direct labor. So the rate variance. Bear in mind the formula for the rate variance. Actual rate minus standard rate times actual labor hours. Actual rate because it is related to the direct labor. The price variance is about direct materials. Okay, so fill up the amounts. And now we have a result of $200 favorable variance because the actual rate is lower than the standard rate. Next is the time variance. The formula is actual labor hours minus standard labor hours times standard rate. Again, easy to solve. You just need to fill up the amounts you have identified before. And the result is $1,260 favorable because the workers utilize less labor hours than compared to what was expected. When we apply what we have computed before with regard to the rate variance and labor time variance, we will be able to get our total direct labor cost variance. So carry over the amounts that we have computed. Since both of these are favorable, so we just need the simple addition. So the total is $1,960 of favorable variance for direct labor cost. Since we're done with the first and second requirement, we will now proceed to the third requirement. But before that, let us first revisit the problem and look at the details relating to the third requirement, which is the computation for the factory overhead cost variance. So this is the problem again of Road Ripper Tire Company, and these are the details with regard, the important details with regard to determining our factory overhead cost variance. So I have read this before, so we just need to identify the important factors for us to compute our variance. Factory overhead cost variance analysis is a bit tricky because it is not like solving for direct materials and direct labor cost variance, because it involves heavily on having a predetermined rate based on an activity level, like what we have learned before on job order, process costing, and an activity-based costing, where we apply a predetermined rate for overhead, but with a difference. Now, what is that difference? We'll learn that here in this problem. First, you must identify the important details. So based on the problem, it is given that at 100% normal capacity based on 2,000 direct labor hours, we have our predetermined overhead rates of $4 for variable overhead cost and $6 for fixed overhead cost. Now that's a total of $10 per direct labor hour. That's our predetermined overhead rates. Our standard direct labor hours is at 2,080 hours. Actual direct labor hours is 2,000 hours with corresponding total variable costs and fixed costs. Our actual output is 4,160 tires. Now, what does it mean to have a standard direct labor hours? Well, our standard direct labor hours is the should be labor hours when we produce 4,160 tires. So instead of utilizing 2,000 hours based on our standard, it should have been 2,080 hours. So let's move on to the third requirement. So we are asked to compute for the variable factory overhead controllable variance, the fixed factory overhead volume variance, and the total factory overhead cost variance. We have here the formula based on the book, but I have another way of solving the three variances. So here's the method. In order to determine our controllable and volume variance and our total factory overhead cost variance, we need to take into account first our actual cost. So our actual is at 2,000 direct labor hours, which is equal to $8,200 for variable cost and $12,000 for fixed. So that's a total of 20,200. Now, who do we compare our actual with? When we account for factory overhead, do we initially use the actual in accounting for work in process? No, we use the predetermined overhead rates. For this, we need to use the standard direct labor hours. Why? Because this is the should have been hours utilized when we produce the actual output of 4,160 tires. Now this is the difference. Previous topics we apply our overhead based on actual direct labor hours. But here in standard costing, we apply our overhead based on standard direct labor hours. So let's do the computation. We multiply our respective rates to our standard direct labor hours, and then we'll get the result of $8,320 for variable overhead and $12,480 for fixed overhead. So that's a total of $20,800. Now, what do we call this $20,800? Remember, we use the predetermined overhead rates based on the standard direct labor hours. So this is now our applied factory overhead cost. It is the $20,800. So now we have here a formula in solving for factory overhead cost variance. When we compute for the variance based on the individual cost, note that the variable overhead controllable variance is the difference between the actual and applied based on standard direct labor hours. It is the same for fixed overhead volume variance. So when we compute for the difference, we will get $120 for variable overhead controllable variance and $480 for fixed overhead volume variance. Now, are these favorable or unfavorable? Well, note that the actual cost is lower than the standard cost. So in essence, it is favorable. So our total factory overhead cost variance is now at $600 favorable. So that's one way to solve for the factory overhead cost variance. And that ends problem 7-3B. Thank you.